Hi students, welcome to the BYJU'S Hindu News Analysis for 16th of November 2018. So let's get started. So let's look into the first article. The first article says Supreme Court pulls up stage for not recruiting judges. So what is the context here? So the context is in reference to vacancies that we see in the subordinate judiciary. So the Supreme Court in this case has taken the suo motu cognizance and has questioned the approach of the state government as well as the administrative parameters. So what the Supreme Court has said is that you, the state government, you, the administrative apparatus, are not working, and this is due to your lackadaisical approach. So what it goes on to say is that you are not able to conduct the examinations on time, you're not able to provide the residence accommodations, you're not able to provide the courtrooms to the judges, and all this is due to your lethargy, is due to delay in the approach, and that is why there is poor infrastructural setup. So what the Supreme Court has done here is it has warned the state government as well as the administrative apparatus to make sure that the examination happens on time, and it is also able to provide suitable infrastructure so that the pendency of the cases in the lower judiciary is somewhat reduced. When we look into pendency of cases, what we see is there are about 3 crore cases that are pending in the lower courts. And when we look into the vacancies, what this article goes on to say is as on March 31st 2018, 24% of the judicial positions in lower courts were vacant nationwide. The Supreme Court has said that 5,133 out of 22,036 posts were vacant subordinate courts, and it says that Uttar Pradesh has a vacancy of 42.18%, Bihar has a vacancy of 37.23%, and Meghalaya has it at 59.79%. And when you look into Uttar Pradesh itself, what the court found was that there are about 1,000 vacancies in Uttar Pradesh alone. So what the government has done is it has not followed the approach that the Supreme Court has given in the earlier instances, and because of its lackadaisical approach, because of its lethargic behavior, what we see is all these vacancies that were supposed to have been filled in is not being filled in because of all this infrastructural lacunae. So in order to address this, what the Supreme Court has also done is it has laid up certain important cases previously, and one such important case is in reference to Malika versus Uttar Pradesh Public Service Commission. So what this case goes on to say is the Supreme Court came up with a streamlining process. It gave certain guidelines so that the state can take an approach and make sure that examination happens on a clear-cut basis. So what the Supreme Court said in this case was it streamlined the whole examination process and it gave certain time schedule. So what it said was when you are conducting certain judicial service examination, it laid out certain time schedules for each stage. Let's say for example there are number of stages. For each stage that the examination is being conducted by the state government as well as by the administrative apparatus, it provided certain time schedule. So the state government had to accommodate and make sure that the examination was conducted within this particular time schedule. And what did the Supreme Court say? So the Supreme Court say in case it is for the civil judges, then it should be accommodated within 321 days, and in case it is for the district court judges, then these people will have to be accommodated within 183 days. So this examination cycle that you are planning to do has to be from the date of notification, the minute you release into the public forum, and this has to be accommodated within the last day of joining. So what the Supreme Court did in Malik Masar versus the Uttar Pradesh Public Service Commission is that it laid out a clear plan and a structure and a time schedule that you will have to follow, that is the state government will have to follow, so that there is no deviation that is happening. As well as what you will also see is that there is a lot of accountability. But in this particular case, what is the major problem? So the Supreme Court came up with a time schedule. The Supreme Court said that you, the state government, will have to follow and finish off the examination conduction within this particular time. That is, it has to be conducted within 321 days for the civil courts. It has to be conducted for the 183 days in the district judges. But the problem is, what is the rationale behind it? How is that the Supreme Court came up with this particular argument? So the first problem that we see in this conduction of the examination process is the rationale. So the first point that we have to make sure is on what basis did the Supreme Court come up with this particular argument that it has to be filled within 183 days, or are within 321 days. So the rationale itself is questionable. So what is being discussed is that this cannot be conducted on a particular data that is being given by the Supreme Court, because there is no rationale for it. And the second important point that we also have to consider is, how can you have a one size fit all approach? Let's take for example a state like Maharashtra, and let's take for example a state like Chhattisgarh. Maharashtra is comparatively has a much good numbers in terms of the GDP. It has much better network, it has the logistical support. But let's take a poor state like Chhattisgarh, which is comparatively poor in terms of the economy in compared to Maharashtra. So in this case, they may not have that network approach, they may not have that intended logistical approach where they would be able to conduct the examination in that particular approach in that particular number of days. So what is being questioned in this particular case is that you, the Supreme Court, laid out the argument that it has to be conducted in suitable number of days. But the problem is, how will an advanced state which is able to conduct itself better can be same way compared to a poorer state where it does not have the network approach or a logistical approach? So you cannot have a one size fit all approach for the entire state. So the third thing that this particular Supreme Court judgment also went on to say was that you will be conducting the examination throughout India on a similar pattern on a similar date. But the problem is, let's take for example, there are aspirants who are wanting to have their job prospects. They would be wanting to take up this exam in multiple states. Let's take for example, a person in Maharashtra would be able to take up in Gujarat, or is able to take up in Madhya Pradesh. But if the examination is conducted on the same day, what would happen is these people would not be able to travel. So because they are not able to travel, because there is clash of the dates, these people will lose on their job prospect. So the main argument what this Malik Mashur also comes across is that you cannot have a strict adherence to the timelines. Why? Because this can also lead to corruption. How corruption? In the guise of finish off this exam, what the administrative apparatus can do is they can make sure that they take certain money from the people and somehow make sure that the timeline that the Supreme Court has given is maintained, and those people who are not even meeting the merit thing are inside the system. So the main problem that we see is, one, a particular person who wants to take up the examination in multiple states is not able to take up because of the clash of the dates, and at the same time this can give rise to corruption. The simple reason is because it has to adhere to that particular timeline. So what are we supposed to do? So in order to address all these issues, what the Supreme Court should ideally do is it should lay out a structure. This structure should have a basic framework, this should have a basic skeleton, but the muscle part of this should be given to the state government. So what can the state government do? You can prescribe a particular standard, but it is the state which will be able to bring about the modifications with respect to number of dates that it will be able to complete this particular examination. So you cannot have a particular number of days for all states, but instead lay out a structure, but it is the state which will have the flexibility to design its approach and then conduct that examination within the suitable number of days according to its network as well as its logistical approach. And at the same time, the Supreme Court cannot actually restrict this particular number of days. It cannot haphazardly come up with a particular number, let's say 183 or 321. So it has to have a statistical evidence, it has to have a data driven approach, it has to have certain methodological basis, and all this has to be accommodated. So it cannot on a haphazard basis come up with a particular timeline, but instead what it has to do is it has to make sure that the flexibility is given to the states and the states are able to devise their own program, and this program has to be data driven and it has to have certain evidence based approach. So this is what we need to understand in reference to this article. So moving on, let's look into the next article. So the next article is taken from the ad, and what is important is that we are speaking about one of the important dam, and that is the Pong Dam. So kindly remember, this can be a factual information that can be asked in your prelims examination. So that is why we have been discussing this article. So where is this Pong Dam? So this Pong Dam is in Himachal Pradesh. So this is one of the ad that has been posted by the Himachal Tourism. So kindly remember, the Pong Dam is a lake which is there in the Himachal Pradesh, and also of importance to us is that this is a international wetland and it is recognized by the Ramsar Convention. So this is important, a factual data that you need to remember. So moving on, let's move into the next article. So the next article says a fisherman casts his net in the Gomati River. So what is of importance to us is that we know about the Gomati River, which could be a prospective question in your GS paper 1 from geography as well as from the environment. So what it is important is this Gomati is a tributary of the Ganges. It originates near Mainkot from a lake which is called as Fulhar Jheel in Madakunda, and the river is one of the major sources of water, drinking water in the region of Lucknow. But what is the problem right now? So what this article goes on to say is that there is rising pollution that has contaminated the river, leading to a fewer catch. So because of the rising pollution, what you actually see is there is mass killing of the fishes within the region of Gomati. And why is this due to? This is not due to sewage maltreatment, but instead it is due to the industrial effluents that have been discharged. So which are the industries that have been releasing their effluents into this river? So you have the paper mills, you have the sugar factories, you have the distilleries. So all these major industries that are located in and around this Gomati River, especially in the areas of Sitapur as well as Lakhimpur, are dooming this aquatic life. Why? Because they are letting all their effluents which are untreated, and this untreated water or the untreated waste is dumped into this Gomati River, and as a result of this, what we see is a devastation, that is killing of the fishes. And because there is killing of the fishes, these people, which is a main source of livelihood for them, are not able to have a required yield as well as the catch for them. So what is also being said in this article is that the required amount of oxygen levels that is usually seen in all these aquatic life is you require about 4 to 6 mg per liter of dissolved oxygen levels. But what is seen in Gomati right now is you have just 1 mg per liter. So ideally what should have been at 4 to 6 is currently at 1 mg per liter, all due to the pollution. So because of this pollution, there is less catch, is what this article all about. So this can be a prospective question in your GS paper 1 from the geography, that is in the prelims as well, where they'll ask you certain facts was discussed, and they can also ask you from the environmental perspective from the GS3 paper where there is pollution as well. So this is all we need to understand in reference to this article. So moving on, let's look into the next article. So the next article says when judges legislate. So what is this article speaking about? So this article basically speaks about the doctrine of separation of powers, or what is also called as the trias politica. So the earliest reference that you see in reference to the separation of powers was actually in the 16th and the 7th century, and that was made by Aristotle as well as the Plato. And then we also see Locke supporting this argument, but as a script, as an argument, and as from the literature perspective, what you see is it was Montesquieu who came up with this particular proposal of separation of powers in his book called as Spirit des Lois, which is also called as the Spirit of Law, that was published in 1748. So what is this separation of powers? So according to Montesquieu, what he goes on to say is that there should be three different powers. One, you have the legislature which makes the laws, you have the executive which implements the laws, and you have the judiciary which interprets the laws. So what he basically goes on to say is that any concentration of powers in one person or a group or an organization or a group of persons can result into despotism, tyranny as well as dictatorship. So what he does is, in order to avoid this tyranny, he says that there should be certain checks and balances, and these checks and balances has to be done, and there also have to be an independent organ. Why independence? So that each organ, each separate entity, each organization as a whole is able to perform its organizational functions independently. But at the same time, there needs to be certain checks and the balances. So the legislature legislature is looking into the judiciary, so the judiciary is looking into the legislature, and you have the legislature which looks into the executive as well. So you have independence which creates a separation, a thin line of barrier, but at the same time all these people having a constant watch in case they are executing something which is arbitrary. Why? Because they have certain discretionary powers, and these discretionary powers can be misutilized. So in order to make sure that they have an independent stand, and at the same time their checks and balances are also accommodated, that is what is called as the separation of powers. So Montesquieu clearly goes on to say that each organ should be independent of the other, so they should be something different. So you have the legislature, executive and judiciary, and at the same time they should be performing certain functions that is explicitly focused to that particular domain. That is, the legislature has to legislate, the executive has to implement, the judiciary has to interpret. So these entities should not have a overlap. In case there is overlap, then there will be tussle, and then what we will see is a constant chaos that is being voiced in the Montesquieu protocol. So what is also being done is, in order to give boost to this idea, what the constitution has also done is, it has given certain interpretations and it has given certain constitutional values. So what are the constitutional values? One such constitutional value is the Article 50. So Article 50 clearly gives the separation of judiciary from the executive. So this is one of the directive principles of the state policy. So in order to give field to the separation of powers, it has said that the state shall take steps to separate the judiciary from the executive in the public services of the state. And at the same time we also have another article called as Article 122, where the courts are not supposed to inquire into the proceedings of the parliament. So there has been drawn a clear line, and this line is what makes the judiciary independent, the legislature independent, and judiciary independent, acting in their own streams, but at the same time they can also have a constant watch if anyone is meddling with their affairs as well. So this idea of separation of powers has been proved in n number of Supreme Court cases as well. So let's go back to 1955 in the Ram Javaya versus the state of Punjab. So what this article goes on to say is that this implies there is a broad separation of powers in the constitution among the three organs of the state. That is, one organ, that is in the form of legislature, executive and judiciary, they'll not be able to encroach the domain of the other. So they'll not be able to fiddle with the domain of the other. Each has their own domain. They'll have to work only according to their domain, and they'll not be able to replace one over the another to make sure that there is no despotism and arbitrariness. And at the same time, what it also sets is that there is a delicate balance in the constitution which will not result into a chaos when one overstepped its particular domain. And next important case that it also speaks about is the Union of India versus the Duke Nandan Agarwal in the 1991. So it said that the power to legislate has not been conferred on the courts, and it further says that in Suresh Seth versus the Commissioner Indo Municipal Corporation, the court observed that under constitutional scheme, Parliament and legislative assemblies exercise sovereign power to enact laws. So when it comes to making of laws, it is the Parliament as well as the state assembly which will make the laws, and it is the judiciary which will just interpret the laws. So the making is the explicit domain of the Parliament as well as the state legislature. The executive and the judiciary will not be able to play its part, is what is being established in all these cases. But of late what you see is that the Supreme Court, in the garb of judicial activism, has entered the domain of the legislature. So the Supreme Court has become hyper activist in making all these laws. Let us take the example of some of the cases that has been discussed. So first it says in the Arun Gopal versus the Union of India, the Supreme Court fixed timings for bursting Diwali fireworks and prohibiting the use of non-green fireworks, though there are no laws to that effect. We did discuss that the legislature is the one who makes the laws, but here the Supreme Court has overcome this particular barrier, and and what it has done is it has framed a particular law while the law was not actually there. So it has made sure that it is this law which is bound to all the people, but ideally the law was supposed to be made by the legislature. So the legislature has got the power from the people. So we live in a democracy where people elect their legislators. They have given the power to the legislators, and it is these legislators who are accountable to the people, and that is why they are making the laws. These legislatures who sense the pulse of the people, they know what is that the people want, and that is why they come up with certain legislative things. But why is that the Supreme Court is entering the domain of the legislature and making laws is what is being questioned in this. Here the people are the ones who are electing the legislatures, and the legislators should ideally work upon the laws. But why is the judiciary on its whims and fancies, which do not know the pulse of the people, is entering the domain of the legislator, is what is being asked in this. Further, it says in the MC Mehta versus the Union of India, the court annulled the statutory rule 115 of 21 of the Central Motor Vehicles Act 1989 when it directed that no BS4 vehicle should be sold after March 30, 2020, and that only BS6 vehicles can be sold after that date. So even here it is the legislature which has to come up with the laws, but the judiciary time and again has been entering the fold of the legislature, and it is creating barriers for the legislature. Ideally, the Supreme Court or any of the high courts should direct the legislators to come up with a law. They can give a framework or ask the legislature to come up with the law, but instead the Supreme Court, which has to interpret the law, is gone on to publish a law. It is directing number of people as well as executive to perform certain actions according to its legislative things. So what this article basically goes on to say is that the Supreme Court should know what this separation of powers is. Its restriction is only in interpreting the law. It cannot make the law. So each judge, when he is interpreting the law and he is executing that particular law and framing a particular law, can have certain whims and fancies. He can have his own ideological background. This cannot be accommodated. Why? Because you have a democratically elected government which is here to make laws. So what should the Supreme Court do is, it is to suggest the legislature, but instead what is happening right now is that there are people who are going against this separation of powers, which could obviously lead to uncertainty in the future law as well as chaos, as every judge will start drafting his own laws according to his whims and fancies. So this concept is all about the doctrine of separation of powers. So kindly remember few of the cases. Why? Because the UPSC can ask to illustrate with examples. That is when these things can become handy. So moving on, let's look into the next article. So the next article says PM favors inclusive Indo-Pacific approach. So recently we did discuss about the Indo-Pacific question. We did also discuss about the RCEP. So one of the important things that is known from the prelims perspective factually that we have to know is that we attended the 13th East Asia Summit in Singapore, and this East Asia Summit will have countries, that is 10 Asian countries, as well as Australia, China, India, Japan, New Zealand, South Korea, Russia, as well as US. Rest of the concepts with respect to the Indo-Pacific as well as the RCEP has already been dealt with. So kindly go through our earlier CNAs as well. But the other important point that we also have to understand is the India-Singapore Hackathon. Since Prime Minister Narendra Modi visited Singapore, one of the key important things was also the India-Singapore Hackathon. So what is this all about? It is a platform for the youth of two countries to harness and showcase their innovations, and this was conducted by the Nanyang Technological University in Singapore as well as the All India Council for Education conducted the hackathon that included solving 8 problem statements. So what are these 8 problem statements? It included mapping, synchronized output of diverse social media, shared digital identity verification, effective number estimate, space management and allotment, effective learning, and personal security. So what we also have to understand is it was between these two countries. So 20 teams from both these countries were competing in this, and then they had each group had 3 students, and this was accommodated by one mentor. And according to this, what it further goes on to say is that the winning teams from India were IIT Kharagpur, NIT Trichy, as well as the MIT College of Engineering, Pune. But these are factual data. This will not be asked, but this is all we have to understand in case something pops up in the prelims examination. Another important festival that Prime Minister Narendra Modi visited in Singapore was called as the FinTech Festival. So what is this FinTech? So as the name denotes, it has fin as well as technology. So what it means is you have finance as well as technology. So you have certain technologies. Let's take for example the programming, the tools as well as algorithm technological tools that we are using in order to make sure that the financial transactions in the banking system is comparatively smoother as well as simpler. So this financial technology basically means that you're using certain technologies to make your financial services affordable, easier as well as simpler. So Prime Minister Narendra Modi did attend the Financial Technology Festival in Singapore. But what is of importance to us is we need to know what is the significance of it, and what we also need to know is the concerns bit of this financial technology. So when we look into the significant aspect, what are the important advantages, what are the important moves, or what could be the prospects because of the financial technology? The most important point that we can take as a significant aspect is the reach. So more number of people would be able to enter the banking domain because everyone these days have the smartphone. All that they have to do is transact over the smartphone. So the reach is comparatively increased, and what this will further do is it will include more number of people in the financial inclusion. And at the same time, because there is a larger reach, what we are able to do is we are able to sharply reduce the costs of it. Instead, what used to happen earlier is you had the people who had to personally go to the banking system. They had to wait through a long set of queues, and what this led to was a lot of cost because these people had to maintain a large number of people, a large number of personnel. So this is comparatively reduced, and the time that the number of people who employed to go to the banking system is also reduced. So the cost, that is the personnel appointed in the banking, is reduced. So the costs are reduced. At the same time, the people had to go to the banking system, now have it under their fingerprint, so the amount of time is also reduced. What this can lead to is a cheaper and faster set of services. So because it is able to provide cheaper and faster set of services, it is also going to help the government. How is it going to help the government? It is able to send the messages to all these people through this financial technology things. It is able to benefit and reduce the leakages as well as better target all the public services. So because you are able to target a specific community, a specific set of people, what we are able to reduce is the leakages, and that is why public service efficiency would also help the government as well. So this is importance of the financial technology. So the next article says SuperEarth found orbiting sun's nearest single star. So what are we discussing about? We are discussing about the Barnard star. So all that the UPSC can ask with respect to this is the factual data. We don't have to know any analytical perspective from it. Only thing is we have to remember the facts, because these facts can be asked in your prelims paper 1 in your examination. So let's know some of the facts. So it says it is a red dwarf about 1/6 as massive as the Earth's sun and just 3% as luminous. Astronomers think Barnard star may be about 10 billion years old, twice as old as our sun. Barnard star lies in the constellation Ophiuchus, that is the Serpent Barrier, and is visible from both northern as well as the southern hemispheres. Kindly remember, this can be a confusing question which can be asked. So it can be seen from both northern as well as the southern hemisphere. Astronomers estimate Barnard star surface temperature to be -275 degrees Fahrenheit. Why? Because it has very less luminous, it has very less light. That is why the temperature is comparatively less. It is about 3.2 times more massive than our home planet, making it a super Earth, a class of world significantly larger than the Earth but smaller than the ice giants such as Neptune. So what are super Earths? Those planets which are more than the Earth, that is in size as well as mass, but less than the ice giants such as Neptune are called as the super-Earths. And what this article further goes on to say is that Barnard star B is second closest known exoplanet to our sun, and then it further says at nearly 6 light years away, Barnard star is the next closest sun after the Alpha Centauri triple system. So both these factual data is what we need to know. Rest of the things will not be falling under the syllabus of the UPSC domain. So kindly remember these facts, and this is all will be asked in the examination. So moving on, let's look into some of the prelims practice questions. So the first question it says is the quadrilateral group includes, is it USA, China, India and Afghanistan? And the answer for this is it includes USA, China as well as Afghanistan and not India, because what included here in the quadrilateral group is not India but Pakistan. So this involves US, China, Pakistan as well as Afghanistan. So kindly remember the quadrilateral coordination group. So Operation Enduring Freedom was a program that was taken up by, it was USA. So what is this Operation Enduring Freedom? It says that Operation Enduring Freedom was the official name used by the US government for the global war on terrorism post their 9/11. So Operation Enduring Freedom primarily refers to the war in the Afghanistan. After 13 years, on December 28, 2014, President Barack Obama announced the end of Operation Enduring Freedom in Afghanistan. Continued operations in Afghanistan by the United States military force, both non-combat and combat, now occur under the name Operation Freedom Sentinel. So kindly remember, Operation Enduring Freedom as well as Operation Freedom Sentinel is from the United States of America. So the next question is biological oxygen demand is a standard criterion for, it is a straightforward question. It is nothing but pollution assay in the aquatic ecosystems. Why did we discuss this? This is a previous year question paper because we also discovered about the Gomati River. So moving on, let's look into the mains practice question. It says the doctrine of separation of powers has not been followed by the judiciary in the name of judicial activism. Illustrate with examples. We have already discussed this in the editorial. So when you are writing this answer, first explain what the doctrine of separation of powers is. Then we will also have to explain what is judicial activism and how the judiciary has taken over the legislature in the form of overreach, and that we will have to illustrate with certain case studies. That is what this question all about. So kindly write all your answers on the comment section so that we can have the peer review as well as we can validate it from our end. So this is it for today. Thank you so much. All the best.